Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around. Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed the chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you all will stay to supper," he said in his politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after. We shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first, now to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and all made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top, with one hand, while the Hobbit ran after them almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat, pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat, splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole. When you've finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully, with all the plates. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned up and put away safely as quick as lightning. The Hobbit was turning around and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. And they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, under the table, or round and around the ceiling. Wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each of the one of Thorin's. And Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover around the wizard's head. Get a cloud of them around him already. In the dim light, it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood watching. He loved smoked rings. When he blushed to think at how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Killy and Filly rushed for their bags and brought out the little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Ombor produced a drum from the hall. Bifer and Bofer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with vials as big as themselves, with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It's a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, or over the water and very far away from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened to the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard waggled against the wall. The dark filled the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. Suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. Dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while humans fell like ringing bells, or hammers rather. In places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells, where ancient king and elvish lord, their many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung. The dragon fire, in twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold, where no man dwells. There they lay long, and many a song a song unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring in the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, its flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. Dragons' ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountain smoked beneath the moon, the dwarves, they heard the thump of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away, ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things being made by hands and by cunning and by magic and moving through him. A fierce and a jealous love, the desire of hers of hearts of dwarves. And something tokish woke up in him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, explore the caves, wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window, the stars out there in the dark sky above the trees, thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill, again. He got up trembling, had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, more than half a mind to pretend to, go and hide beneath the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he had guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat on the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." This was how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met here together in this house of our friend and fellow conspirer, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." Pause for a breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit. Compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and, worst of all, fellow conspirer. The no-nos came out. He was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policies, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which, from some of us, perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. The estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves. I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he probably would have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone that there was anything that not known already. He was rudely interrupted, for Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer, and may never return. He began to feel a shriek coming up inside, would very soon burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearth rug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. He fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. That was all they could get for him for a long time. They took him and laid him out of the way in the drawing-room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'd probably realize that this was only a poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-great-uncle Bullroarer, who was so huge, for a hobbit, that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins at Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Field, and knocked their king, Gollum Gulfimmables. Head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. In this way the battle was won, and the game of golf was invented at the moment. In the meanwhile, however, Bull Roarer's gentler descent was reviving in the guest room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard, Gloin speaking. Humph. Snort, more or less like that. Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all of his relatives. Kill a lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I would have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbling and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. Looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took-side had won. He had suddenly felt that he would go to bed. He would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbling on the mat, made him almost really fierce. Many a time afterward, the Baggins part regretted what he did now. He said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. Walk right in and put your foot in. Pardon me, he said, if I have overheard the words you were saying. Don't pretend to understand what you're talking about or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity, that you would think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago. I am quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert, I had my great-grand uncle once, Bull Roarer, took, and yes, but that was a long, long time ago, said Gloin, and I was talking about you. And I assure you that there is a mark on the door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's usually how it's read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us there's a man of the sorts in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday tea time. Of course there's a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find a 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and we'll have all the bad luck you like. Or go back digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair. And when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at the man and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for you all. If I say he's a burglar he is, or when the time comes. There's a lot more to him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp. Let's have a little light on this. On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread out a piece of parchment, rather like a mat. This was made by Thor, your great-grandfather Thorin, said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much at all, Thorin said disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it. I know where the Mirkwood is and the withered hearth where the great dragon bred. There's a dragon mark in red on the mountain, said Balin. But it'll be easy enough to find him without that, even if we arrive there. If we ever arrive there. There's one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is a secret entrance. See the rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. It may have been secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it's secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there now to find out anything there that is known about these caves. He may. He can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, says the runes. But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size. not even when he was a young dragon, and certainly not after devouring so many dwarfs and men of the Dale. Seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hull there hung a large one of the country round with all his favorite walks marked on in red ink. How could such a large door be kept a secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He's only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf, but in the one way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I would guess that there's a door closed which made it to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is what dwarves' methods. That's the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, got to mention that with this map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck under his jacket. Now things began to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far we have no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east as quiet as careful as we could, as far as Long Lake. After that, trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. Might go there from up along the running river, went on Thorin, taking no notice. And so, too, at the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadows of the mountain. We none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain. And out of it comes the dragon too, far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and this neighborhood heroes are scarce or simply not found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary. This is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here's our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, and chosen and selected burglar. Now let's get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Thorin. Supposedly the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, he said, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map? Didn't you hear our song? Haven't we been talking about this all for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, he said obstinately, putting his business manner, usually reserved for people who try to borrow money off of him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thor's time, our family was driven out of the far north, came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map, and discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old, and now they mined and they tunneled and they made hunger halls and great workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived in the south and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley over the mountain. They built their merry town of Dale there in the old days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skilled most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend and leisure and to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was a wonder in the north. Undoubtedly, that's what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunders as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and the gold was probably getting scarce up there. The dwarves flying south were many getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. They're most especially greedy, strong and wicked worm called Smog. One day he flew up into the air and came south. First we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaked and crackling in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off we saw the dragon settle on the mountain in a spout of flame, and he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods they'd all went up in fire. By that time all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of the great gate. There was a dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in a steam, and the fog fell on Dale. In the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was all too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels and alleys and cellars and mansions and passages. After that there were no dwarves left inside alive, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it all up in a great heap far inside, and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come at night to the dale and carry people away, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people who are dead or gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. A few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smog, and there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. And I asked how they got away, and they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day in a proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we had to earn our livings as best we could, up and down the lands, often sinking as low as blacksmithing work or even coal mining. We have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we have a good bit of laid by and are not so badly off. Your Thorn stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back and to bring our curse home to Smog if we can. I have often wondered about my father and grandfather's escape. I see now that they must have had a private side door which only they knew about. Apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get a hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thor was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Asgog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorn. In Thrain, your father went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday. He was never seen by you since. True, true, said Thorn. Well, your father gave me this to give to you. And if I had chosen my own time and way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours, so on the whole I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorn. I don't understand, said Thorn, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. Explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of the most unpleasant sort he had. He never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know. I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of a necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorn with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out, as usual. And a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and key. We have long ago paid the goblins a Morius, said Thorn. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is the enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. It could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished for was his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him. He was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I've got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door. The dragon must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. Well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed, and an early start after all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorn. Aren't you the burglar, and isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey. Fried, not poached, and mind you don't break 'em. After all the others had ordered their breakfasts without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find a room for all of them, and filled all his spare rooms, and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed, and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure he was going on any journey in the morning. He lay in bed and he could hear Thorn still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. For over the misty mountains cold, dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to find our long forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up.